Good evening, afternoon, morning, everyone. Welcome to Crypto Tonight, episode 6. My name is Yama, and it's my great pleasure to be your host again tonight. So before we start, I just want to say thank you, Pulling Mining, for this sponsoring this office. However, the network is not really working very well. But anyway, Kevin was planning to join us, but he couldn't really make it as he's traveling today in Sichuan to deliver water. However, we still got something pulling here and something also Bitcoin there. So tonight we're going to talk about Bitcoin origin, all news stories, and its future. So to start with, please join me in welcoming our 4 fantastic guests of tonight, tech geeks and financial geeks. First, brief introduction. Could you please share a bit about your background and how did you first hear about Bitcoin and what were like your initial thoughts? Start with Adam, the co-founder and CEO of Blockstream.
Yeah, I was interested in electronic cash for a long time, since mid-90s. And so the first thing I heard about Bitcoin was an email from Satoshi Nakamoto in fall of 2008. And
you received an email from him.
Yeah, so I think it's the first email that anybody received. Like a number of people sent Gwen their emails and he put them on a blog post. So it looks like it was the first email. Now, of course, I didn't realize that this was a pseudonym. I thought it was a real name. And
maybe this is a real name.
Maybe it is, yeah. So I sent him, he was asking about the citation for Hashcash, so I sent him that and also sent him some information about B-Money, which is a related electronic cash system using mining that was discussed. I mean, it's just a design, it wasn't implemented. And that was from 1998, a year after Hashcash. So there was a long-running discussion about how to deploy electronic cash. And from the 1997 Hashcash, the conversation changed a bit to using mining to do that, because it was a way, as Wei Dai put it, to have electronic cash system without a banking interface, because relying on banks would be difficult. Mm-hmm. And it was also, people were thinking about doing it, how to do it in a decentralized way, because the previous electronic cash system that people were very interested in, which was DigiCash, had a centralized double spend database, and the DigiCash, the company, went bankrupt. And so anybody who had DigiCash coins, and I had a few, they disappeared. Like, you had the coins, but nobody could tell if they were valid because you couldn't reach the double spend database to check. So that sort of central point of failure, single point of failure, informed people's thinking. So then they were looking at, B-Money, for example, was talking about broadcasting transactions, and Nick Szabo's BitGold was talking about Byzantine Generals protocol, but they're both just designs. They didn't get implemented. I think the thing that later got implemented was Hal Finney's RPAL, reusable proof of work, that got implemented by Hal Finney in 2004, but it's still centralized. So the decentralized ones didn't get implemented. There were design issues, so things that people didn't quite know how to fix that Satoshi fixed. So I think that's one of the innovations, is finding a way to make it fully decentralized, where B-Money and BitGold had some partially sort of federated or human involvement parts of the design.
Mm-hmm. So I know you are the creator of the Hashcash, and in '97 you came up with this Hashcash idea, and which was also cited in the Bitcoin white paper. I guess people already all knew Adam. So since you are the closest point that we can get to Satoshi, should we just go direct and ask you, how are you feeling Satoshi today? Or should we ask, how's the weather today in Malta? Which question do you prefer, Adam?
What was the first question? How
are you feeling Satoshi today?
Oh, okay. No, so I'm not Satoshi, and so a lot of people have an interest to speculate and find Satoshi, but I think Satoshi is presumably left and not coming back. Mm-hmm. And so I think people tend to sort of, in trying to find Satoshi, they do Google searches and look for things they think would be related, and so then they have a kind of selection bias. It's like, if you were looking for the author of a book and it's published by a pseudonym, then you do a search for book authors, and then people say, well, look, these book authors can write. So yeah, I can write C++, but so can 1 million other people. Now, of course, I was interested in electronic cash, but that's what people were searching for, right? Mm-hmm. There's like people who are interested in electronic cash, so it's not surprising. And they also suspect like Hal Finney and Nick Szabo and Wei Dai and a bunch of other people. So there's like a lot of coincidences, plus looking for people with relevant skill sets and interests.
Thank you, Adam. So probably we can talk about the weather in Malta instead. At least we know weather is maybe too English topic for conversation. Anyway.
Well, it's pretty warm outside, very nice. Sunny. It's apparently vitamin D is good for the immune system, mm-hmm. and being able to to help fighting off COVID, I guess, if you get sick.
The weather in Malta helps. Satoshi has also a better mood. Thank you, Adam. Next, moving on to Beto, my dear friend from Argentina.
Hello. My story with Bitcoin is much less impressive, I think, than Adam's. I had a friend from school, and we were working on different projects. It was 1998. So there was a reward program business he was designing, and I was helping some technical sides. And he came up with the name of Bitcoins, bitcoins.com, mm-hmm. which was the domain he registered. But we couldn't go around. We were really young. We were like 16, 17 when we started doing all these things. And at that point, we were 21, I think, or 20. So we couldn't get it really going. And time passed, and it was 2011, and he called me at night and asked me, Beto, I need to sell the domain. And he was buying a house, and I really need the money. And but I have an offer, but I heard that something going on with Bitcoin, something. Why don't you check it? So I started researching, and I was blown away because one of my first jobs was a Forex trader. So when I came into all of this, it just made a lot of sense for me. And I just called him like 3 hours later and told him, don't sell. Don't sell it, please. I think this is so huge. And then I started working on, because in Argentina we have a lot of problems, economic problems. Yeah. And I thought, why not we start integrating Bitcoin, into companies, because they will need it to be safer than they are with the local economic situation. And I started working also trying to do an integration with, I was teaching SAP at the university. So I started trying to do a co-innovation program with SAP, trying to put Bitcoin into it. And at that time, my friend did the first conference in Argentina for Bitcoins. And there I met Tony Galippi, which is the founder and CEO, was the founder and CEO of BitPay. And I started telling him all the things I understood that would be interesting, because they had the first payment processor for Bitcoin. And I thought it would be really interesting into integrating it into companies. So the next day he told me, why don't you come work for us? I said, okay. And from then on, I started applying all the use cases I thought would be interesting, and here I am. That's the history.
Nice. I mean, besides Bitcoins.com and BitPay, I met Beto last year in Buenos Aires and quickly became good friends. Beto, you're more Chinese than anyone that I know in my life. I really appreciate the way how you value our Huaxia culture, Huaxia Wenming. It's not just in your ideas, but also in your blood, in your daily life. And by the way, Beto is also a pro in the Kung Fu, Zhanzhuang, and Yiquan. And you know, one of the most popular exercise today in China is actually to pay $50 per hour to learn how to stand still properly, which is called Zhanzhuang. I couldn't really understand it until I met Beto. And Beto even loves Chinese culture so much that you named your daughter Sophia May. And May is a Chinese word meaning beautiful. And I'm so sure she will grow up not just being beautiful, but also intelligent. Thank you, Beto. So happy to finally have you here. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. So next, Chun, the co-founder of F2Pool.
You can hear me, right?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, so happy to be here again, Crypto Tonight with Yama.
Thank you.
And for me, first read about Bitcoin at Slashdot in 2011 because I was quite busy working on my personal projects, some Apple Store apps.
Searching aliens, no?
So, yeah, so yes, missed the opportunity to get to know Bitcoin earlier. So after I finished my earlier projects and start to check Slashdot regularly again, and I found Bitcoin. People talking about something called Bitcoin. I didn't know. I know nothing about the economy back then, so I skipped the first few articles I read about that, and until I see more and more often people mention Bitcoin at Slashdot, I go to Bitcoin Wiki and to check out how it works, what is it, and suddenly get to know get understanding like what Bitcoin, how that's work, what is the proof work. So I immediately second day went to local market, got 2 pieces of GPUs and start my Bitcoin. And because I was also contributing to a project called SETI at Home, so I immediately convert my existing SETI at Home operations into Bitcoin operations. And SETI at Home is total free contribution, but Bitcoin, you can actually get something back and get something worth something. And so that I was one of the few original Bitcoiners in China. So I remember back in 2011, the first time I went to Bitcoin forum, I see a subforum called Chinese Student. I had no idea why this forum is there. So actually, if you today you go to Bitcoin Talk, and you can still find that forum camp. And also, after 1 or 2 months into mining, try different mining pools, I stick with DeepBit for an extended time and created a team called China Team. And among the team members, some quite famous Bitcoiners like Wang Chun, who later created the first ASIC, some team members of my team. And I only mined Bitcoin from 2011 to 2013 because my GPU farm is quite, except the GPU itself, is worth something, and all the any other things like mainboard, memory, RAM, and USB stick. I use USB stick, so everything together is only worth like $30 second hand. So I cannot switch the mining farm to other coins like Litecoin because it doesn't have enough RAM. And when the ASIC introduced, and I have no choice but to shut everything down. And so my Bitcoin miner life ended 7 years ago. Being operating mining pool is very different, like mining Bitcoin on your own. So I don't see myself a Bitcoin miner anymore. So yeah, from later story, I think many people already know that. Like F2Pool started 2013, and we had Slash at first, and then Bitbit. Once Bitbit got almost 40% of the network hash rate, and then Ghash.io, and we replaced Ghash.io in 2014, became the world's largest Bitcoin mining pool. And Antu still wasn't even born. So yeah, so happy, like after so many years, we replaced pooling and become number one again. And yeah, so yeah, if you look back into the history, we at some moment I even feel that we cannot continue. We cannot stay. But
you're still here today.
I still remember other mining pools like BW and also Bitmain, and if you check it again, suddenly you feel that all those strong competitors just suddenly disappeared.
But still, we still
hopefully we can stay.
But we still have
hopefully we can
stay.
for
Yes.
extended time.
Yeah. So Chun is a really trouble man, and but it's also a real geek. Slashdot, set to the home, deeply influenced by Wikipedia neutral point of view. And I know neutrality and decentralization forms the way how Chun you see the world today. And really thank you for being with us here again. And really appreciate that you made for the show. I know because you are traveling these days. So moving on, next Su, our old friend, the CEO of the Eros Capital.
Yes. Well, for me, the history is not as technical or pure, I guess, but more sort of as a trader and as a speculator. I think for me, would have been late 2012, early 13. At that time, I had just quit my job at a investment bank, and my partner and I were starting 3 hours at a time to trade actually a high-frequency foreign exchange, so totally separate from Bitcoin. And we had a break in between. So we started in San Francisco and we were going to move to Singapore, which we ended up doing. And we had a break of about maybe 6 months where we had to set things up. So the first trader that we hired was a guy named Joey Ergo, who later went to Coinbase. And basically we had been looking at ways to move money into Macau because we were playing poker at that time to strategists at the time. And it started watching the price as well at that time because we had learned that apparently the best way to get money in was through Bitcoin already, even though the price was, the liquidity is not very good, but it was already being used in that way. And I found that really fascinating. Later on, he told me, if I ever make a lot of money, I'm going to go 100%, denominated in Bitcoin. And I thought he was crazy at that time. I thought, this was an experiment. At that time, I don't think I had downloaded a wallet. I don't think I really read too much about it. I was just watching the number. And watching where it traded. At that point, I started to, maybe 2-3 months later, I started to see that there was like structural arbitrage in the market where you could buy it on Bitstamp and sell it in BTC China and make like 10-15%. Because back then, there was a lot of demand in China and people were using it to move money around as well. So that kind of really interested me because, as a foreign exchange trader, I thought, the world actually does need a sort of decentralized money, right? A money that's not tied to a state and sort of usable by people as a last resort, right? So I think from there, my interest sort of grew more philosophically around Bitcoin as well, and seeing it as investment as well as seeing it as a long-term kind of industry way. But back then, because we were in investment banks, trading foreign exchange and all these things, we had a lot of counterparties who. We were actually scared to talk about Bitcoin then because the connotation when we were in Singapore, you talk about Bitcoin, was that there would be AML flags that would actually get raised on you, and so we never really saw a way to do it institutionally at that time. Later on, we began to set up a subsidiary to trade crypto, and now we've rolled that actually back into our main fund, which is kind of nice to see because. In a way, it shows how far we've come as an industry, right? Where just a few years ago, it was a very dirty word. And now, you have Goldman Sachs saying that they're going to do a conference call to educate their investors on Bitcoin and gold. And so it's been fascinating to see. I think that for me, the really surprising thing, I guess, is how even though it's so subversive in some ways to a lot of things, its growth has been unstoppable in a lot of ways, right? And so that's been the biggest surprise for me, and I continue to be surprised each day.
So Sue, so do you trade Bitcoin, but do you also loan Bitcoin? Because like for example, Chun, he doesn't trade any Bitcoin, he doesn't trade, and you like trade Bitcoin all the time. Do you also loan it?
Do I also loan
Bitcoin?
You mean borrow?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're one of the largest counterparties to some of the big borrow lending desks for doing various arbitrage trading strategies. I think for us, because we have the strength of our traditional hedge fund balance sheet and track record, we have 7 years of audit. We have, we're very well known in the FX space. So that kind of helped us, I guess, show that we were very serious. I mean, there's a number of players that have come from the traditional side. You've got like Jump Trading, Tower Research, quite a few of these firms. And I think that, like in a way, it's very cool because, up until now, you have the investment bank sitting between the end client and the user, the consumer, right? And there's like, there's a sales guy there, a structure, like another sales guy maybe, and then a trader who doesn't really do that much, and they all making a spread, right, each time. And so for a lot of trading firms, it's very interesting because now you have the chance to sit, very, very close to the consumer, very close to the end client, and facilitate his trade or her trade, and with very few middlemen actually. And so like that's I think why a lot of trading firms have come as the volumes have grown. Those opportunities now are more easily captured by more nimble, smaller firms who have low headcounts, who have understand this industry.
That's good. Thank you, Sue. And also, I want to mention a good news for you as well, because last time when you were on the show, I had only 50 Twitter followers, and thanks to you pinning the episode 3 to your Twitter, today I have I think I got 300 followers. Kind of like a milestone, yes. Thanks to you. Thank you. Now, moving on to our opening question. What's Bitcoin? If you were to answer J.K. Rowling's tweet, I do not understand Bitcoin, please explain it to me. How would you answer it from your perspective? Is there any quick and digestible way to improve people's Bitcoin knowledge? Maybe start with Adam. Hi, Adam.
I did actually respond to it, but it's going to take me a while to find it. Let me see.
Finding your tweet?
I can remember what it said. It just said something like, because I wasn't obviously going to say anything technical, but I just said that, technology changes over time, and that when gold was first used for money, it probably seemed strange to people at the time, right? So in a online world, you would expect a technology to evolve to have more online money, something like that.
So it's kind of just like online money. If you would like to explain it to people who doesn't really know anything about Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Adam. How about you, Beto?
Well, I see it more. I will explain it from the infrastructure side. It's like the internet changed the way, for example, we communicate over the phone. And at first, when VoIP came, communication companies said, no, we won't use that technology. No, it changes everything for us, and we don't want it. And now every communications company uses VoIP as an infrastructure for anything they do, because it's cheaper, it's faster. So I think that the same goes for example, payments and the value proposition Bitcoin integrates. And it's just that maybe you won't know in the future that you're using actually Bitcoin and the technology, but you will be using it because it's cheaper and faster.
Okay. And how about you, Chun?
I knew Harry Potter, but I didn't know who wrote it until last week you told me. So I don't know, maybe I'll say the same thing Adam said, and maybe I'll just add that's Bitcoin, and if you don't believe it, you don't get it. I don't have time trying to convince you. Sorry.
That's a great quote, Satoshi quote. Yeah, I found one tweet. So there was another topic on this thread because this thread lasted for a day or so,
Yes.
and people had fun with it. And so there were a lot of fake J.K. Rowlings too.
Yeah.
And Brian Armstrong, well, one of them said, "Okay, I give up. I bought some Bitcoin," but it was a fake J.K. Rowling. And Brian Armstrong from Coinbase responded to it and encouraged the fake J.K. Rowling to deposit their Bitcoin on Coinbase and buy some shitcoins. And so I responded to that to say, "Oh, don't do that. You're going to get, you'll get wrecked. You'll lose money. That's a bad idea." Anyway, so I posted in the chat, somebody made a drawing of this exchange, like a pencil drawing. And I think the person who posted it actually got their account temporarily suspended. It's one of the meme people. Anyway, it was funny. There were other things like that.
Interesting.
And also, I feel the traditional power is so strong. In the past, people trying to convince the society and most of other people like the sun is in the middle, in the center of the universe, not the earth. But you know what happened before. And only history could correct this, could tell the truth. So the result of convince people usually not going well. Some people like being burned by, yeah.
Okay.
But history will tell the truth.
Yes.
After a few hundred years, we'll see that.
Maybe not hundreds. Let's hope just 10 years.
Real gold.
Okay. Thank you, Chun. And how about you, Su? As someone who for the financial background.
I think the concept of digital scarcity is really starting to catch on among traditional investors as well as just mainstream, right? Because, first of all, I think the generationally speaking, people are used to things on the internet being worth as much or more than things that are in real life, right? So, secondly, I think, it's having been around more than 10 years, now no one ever asked, like, when is Bitcoin going to have a chain death? When is it going to all disappear? Now they're just saying, okay, what's the right price for it? Should I buy it now or should I wait? Or, is it? So I think that kind of Lindy effect has gotten us to the point now where, people now do view it as a form of scarcity that exists. And I think that, for at least, for me sitting here in Singapore and speaking to some high net worth individuals here, they don't know where to put money now because, they used to think about property, but now with this COVID situation, they're wondering, okay, maybe I can't even access my property for 3 years because, the situation changed. I can't get a visa to even enter that country where my property is. Maybe I can't even sell it or I have an exit tag. So people are really starting to question whether real estate is a store of value. And I think, especially for Chinese investors, I just saw another very interesting article where it said Chinese investors are expected to net sell from Canada and Australia in the next 5 years, right? And that's like a reversal of a 7-year trend, 10-year trend even, where they've been piling the money in and saying, okay, I buy my Vancouver condo, I buy my Melbourne Sydney condo, and that's my money, right? That's like, it's always going to be there and it's always going to be safe, store of value. Now people are wondering, like, okay, that whole narrative is kind of broken down, right? And with gold now as well, with the difficulties of accessing it, with the difficulties of coming in and buying it, people are now saying, okay, what remains, right? And I think that's what's gotten a lot of the interest from the macro hedge fund community into Bitcoin recently. Huge CME open interest, and huge volumes in GBTC as well. I think people are absolutely converging on Bitcoin as a sort of scarcity play. And so I would explain it first and foremost as 21 million supply. It has the strongest social consensus. It has the strongest consensus that it will keep this gap, and it will be able to defend your rights to scarcity.
So to me, I think the whole Bitcoin system is like a global distributed bank with a transparent, public, traceable, and immutable ledger, and it's open to anyone and no one controls it. And this bank issues only one currency called Bitcoin, limited max 21 million supply, as you mentioned as well, and no inflation issue. And this Bitcoin bank's currency, Bitcoin, is also kind of like this bank's stock. This is my understanding from like a non-geek perspective. I don't know if it makes sense to people or not, but this is how I understand it. Yeah. So thank you. So I know you all have been in the crypto space since the very early days, like 2009, 2011, 2013. What are your most memorable moments and days in the Bitcoin history? Maybe start with Beto, friend of Mr. Bitcoin.
Yeah. Well, I think that there are a few, but one of the funniest I recall is when we went to the 2014 World Cup in Brazil, football World Cup, and we did this gig to do donations through Bitcoin, showing the QR code, because one guy in the US started this showing a QR code during a American football game, saying, showing this big card saying, "Hey mom, send me some Bitcoin," and showing our QR code or something like that. And we took that idea and created this donation cup to have Mr. Bitcoin, which is like a mascot. So, a way to, because at that time people think of Bitcoin like Bitcoin is for drugs, Bitcoin is bad, blah blah blah. So we wanted to do something that was enticing even for kids and for people to see the good side of Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. So we started this donation cup and going around with Mr. Bitcoin through different parts of the World Cup and showing these QR codes and asking people to donate to for the kids. Mm-hmm. And it was great because we got some donations, and with that we went with the kids and did some good stuff. And that showed that Bitcoin could be used from anywhere in the world. Mm-hmm. to send money for good causes. So I think that was one of the most funny things we did.
That's very nice. And you know, I was actually watching an online video with for Adam's interview last year in the Love Bitcoin. And when Adam was doing the interview, and actually the Mr. Bitcoin was actually walking around behind Adam, and like Adam and the host was like chatting, and Mr. Bitcoin was trying to talk, you know, to approach and Adam, and but then I think Mr. Bitcoin was kind of like hesitate, like, okay, maybe they're doing the interview, I should interrupt, and then he turned around. And that was very funny in the video. I think Adam. Probably wish I should send the link to you, Adam. How about you, Adam? What's your memorable moments and days in the Bitcoin history?
Oh, I mean, there's so many. The
you
level of excitement and memes and so on. It's like a soap opera. Keeps you amused endlessly. But I think, you know, one of the most interesting and positive outcome things I saw was the fork drama and the resolution to it, like the UASF movements, and you know, the users coming together and deciding that they were going to take a position because it showed that Bitcoin is hard to change. And you know, that was in like fall of 2017. And after the fork drama was resolved, the price shot up to, you know, 4 or 5 times within those few months to $20,000. And I think before that, for, you know, presumably a year or however long that fork drama was going on at its height, people were uncertain, you know. So I think it was depressing confidence and therefore the price. And the fact that resolved in the way it did, like that basically the market won, the activist investors forced the price of you know, the fork futures, like the SegWit 2x future, down to 10%, and you know, other forks even lower since, was it was very interesting. It was uncertain for a lot of people what was going to happen, and people took risks, but the fact that that was resolved, I think that made Bitcoin a lot stronger because people didn't know exactly what was going to happen and how Bitcoin would survive future financial pressures from big businesses. And basically at that point, you know, the maximum amount of business influence was tried to be organized and applied to the SegWit2x fork, and Bitcoin users basically and market participants with their trades emphatically won, and that became part of Bitcoin's kind of immutability and gold-like guarantee. I think if Bitcoin had been changeable to any business interest, it doesn't matter which business interest, but if it's changeable at influence, that would be less plausible as being digital gold. You can't argue with a gold brick and say, well, I want there to be more, or I want to mix it with copper or something. That doesn't work that way, right? So the fact that the game theory and the economics and the market meant that Bitcoin was actually much more robust than people expected was a very positive thing. Of course, it was also profitable if you sold the right things at the right time. So I had a lot of fun trading as well during that time.
Nice. I think what happened in Bitcoin just made Bitcoin stronger today, as we can see. And since you mentioned price, and Su is actually dealing with the Bitcoin price every day because you trade on Bitcoin. And how about you, Su? What's your memorable moments about in the Bitcoin?
Yes, for me, it's more of a personal story. But I guess in fall of 2013, I was pretty active in the Bitstamp versus BTC China ARB, and I had a very large batch that I had sent fiat to Bitstamp to buy BTC and then sent to BTC China. I had to be on a flight basically that day with my then girlfriend of 2 months, who later became my wife, and it was actually going to intro her to my family and to my parents as well in Beijing at that time. So my parents had booked us a place to stay in Beijing, and when I checked in, I needed to send the coins and make sure that I start selling to the people that I needed to and these kind of things. And I found that there was no internet, very, very bad internet in our hotel. And at that time, for whatever reason, people didn't 4G wasn't really a thing yet. It was 3G and it wasn't good. It was super expensive, and so I told my girlfriend we have to check out. We can't stay here. I'm not going to be able to do what I need to do. And she thought I was absolutely insane because my mom had booked this place for us to stay, right? And I said, no, let's just get in a cab and we'll ask for the best 5-star hotel in the area. So we got in a cab, and then the Intercon in Beijing was right next to it. So we stayed at the Intercontinental, and we were there at maybe midnight, and they quoted me a really high price, and I said, fine, let's do it. And everyone was mad at me the next day because I was they thought I was showing off. Actually, they thought that the whole thing was I was showing off to her when actually I really wanted to just get internet to finish the transaction done. And then I found out the next day that I had left my watch, which was expensive, back at the previous place, and they had to go through 2 hours of house cleaners, but they found it eventually. So that to me is very memorable because it was just thinking back now, I viewed Bitcoin price risk as far riskier than sort of transactional risk, and sort of knowing what I know now, I find price risk to be a lot less than transactional risk. So that kind of is an interesting play where I wouldn't have wanted to hold a very large amount for a transaction for fear of the price moving. But nowadays, with the way that Bitcoin has developed, it's changed my perception of risk as well.
Very interesting perspective, transaction. And since you mentioned transaction, actually Chun, mining pool is actually trying to make sure all the network transactions are safe. And how about you, Chun? What's your memorable moments in Bitcoin?
I think one of the memorable moments, maybe when Bitcoin price hit 1 cent on Mt. Gox, and I just finished my Python script because Mt. Gox back in 2011 grew to 2011 quite primitive, and they didn't have even order book can be seen on the user interface. So I just finished a Python script to fetch from their API and to regularly update. Back then there was no WebSocket. To regularly update every few seconds for their order book. And on that day, I suddenly launched my script and checked it out. I see the price like going down slowly. It's very slow. It took like more than 1 hour until the price finally hit 0.01. And I couldn't tell what happened. Seriously, only second morning I checked the Bitcoin forums, like it got hacked, and yes, quite interesting experience.
Okay. Luckily, we don't have to see that anymore once, and that's really scary. So thank you, guys. So next, maybe moving on to our next session called You Ask Me. And Sue knows this is my favorite format, not just because I'm being a lazy host. And so first, Chun, I know you have some questions for Adam. And Adam, be ready. There might be too many questions for you tonight. But Chun, start your question first.
Yeah, for me, right? I think for Blockstream, what I'm interested in the most is the satellite project. I don't know, like, what's the goal of this project, and how to see the project going after 5 years. And because this satellite, if I understand correctly, is owned by Blockstream, the company, and if launching satellites, the goal is like help aid the decentralization of the network. But satellites is actually owned by a company, so it probably won't help the decentralization. And also other companies like, yeah, please.
So actually we don't own the satellites because they're really expensive to launch. So what we've done is leased bandwidth on 4 satellites and 6 coverage zones. So we tried to select different satellite companies, or different ownership of the satellites, so that there's no one company that could interrupt service. In many places, there are 2 satellites covering the same area or overlapping areas. I think the centralization question is really interesting. So when it was first launched, Andreas Antonopoulos asked a similar kind of question, which is, well, okay, but now do you have to trust Blockstream? Because Blockstream the satellites are actually, they don't have much intelligence. They send back the data that you send up to them. So most of the intelligence is actually on the ground in the uplink site. And the uplink sites are owned and operated by Blockstream. So his question was, well, now do I have to trust Blockstream? Is that better, right? And I think the answer is actually that because the data stream is self-authenticated, because you can look at the proof of work and you can cross-check it, then you end up not having to trust Blockstream. It's kind of like you have a peer-to-peer node and it has on average 8 connections. And let's say one of the connections is much faster. So you end up getting all your data from it, but you'll still cross-check, headers from another slower link. And so if you have the satellite connection, the software allows you to have multiple, to have priority on the satellite connections, your internet connection, but still have, let's say, another slower connection, like a 2G tether or something like that. Then you can check that you're on the longest chain. And so if the satellite sent you some wrong information, you could detect it, kind of thing. Of course, if you only have the satellite, now you're trusting. But there is proof of work on it. So if the information was wrong, the proof of work would slow down, or it would be false, and you could detect that, right? So the other thing, recently, like last month, we increased the bandwidth a lot. So before we had about 300 megahertz spectrum, and now we have 300 kilohertz. Now we have 1.2 megahertz, and due to lots of optimizations, we were able to get up to 25 times as much data through it. So we've turned on capability to synchronize the full history. So if you connect it to a full node and wait about 20 days, it will actually fill in the entire history, even if you have no internet connection. So I think, as to why we think it's interesting, I think it's partly about increasing global connectivity for Bitcoin, so that more people can run a full node and participate in the network. So if you're in an office like you are, Yama, your internet connection is fast, and so running a full node is not a big deal. But for a lot of people, that's either expensive or it uses up their internet connection. So it's sort of, I think people find it interesting that there's a possibility to transact without an internet connection because, you know, in Malta, it's not far from Egypt. And, you know, some years ago they had a revolution. And the first thing that the people doing the coup did was they turned off the internet connection. Or I guess it was the people in power turned off the internet connection. After the coup succeeded, they turned it back on again. So, you know, if you had Bitcoin, if Bitcoin is supposed to be, you know, the digital gold to survive and have hard money in a time of economic crisis or instability, you want Bitcoin to work in this situation. And so, you know, satellite internet connectivity is a quite interesting prospect for Bitcoin. And there are ways to also, I mean, the satellite itself is sending you the bulk data, so it's received, but there are ways to send data using the satellite too. So we're continuing to build out new features for it. Another kind of use case is just for businesses to have an extra connection. I think, you know, for mining pools and mining farms, it's a good idea, and even for exchanges to have multiple internet connections, so that somebody can't, you know, send you wrong information. Like the Bitcoin chain is a bit vulnerable to forks. You know, so if you were only seeing part of the data, you could think a transaction is completed, but actually it's been orphaned by a longer chain. So it's good to have a couple of different connections to be sure that you're on the longest chain. And the satellite is just, from that point of view, the satellite's another independent connection that has, you know, basically no cost, because, you know, once we broadcast it, it doesn't cost extra per user because it's sending the same data everywhere. So we started selling satellite kits now, so you can buy different equipment at different price points. The cheapest way is to buy a software-defined radio and use a laptop. That costs about $100. Then there's a TBS device, which costs about $250, and a Pro device, which is a Nova S400, that costs about $750. And that one can listen to two different satellites simultaneously. So you have two dishes, two satellites, and it's sending different data on the different satellites. So if you can listen to them both, you can get the blocks about twice as fast, and you can sync history about twice as fast, so in about 10 days. There's some more room for optimization, so we're continuing to improve the compression and error correction efficiency and so forth. So it's a lot of fun. I think people enjoy the idea that the Bitcoin data is being broadcast from space. It's you know, feels like science fiction is happening, kind of thing. So it's a fun project.
Yes.
And actually, you know, since we started selling the kits, we were surprised at the number of Pro kits that sold, because they're, you know, 3 times as expensive, but a surprising number of those being bought. Like one guy bought 5 of them. That's like almost $4,000 of equipment in one purchase. So people like to do things with this equipment.
But it sounds affordable.
I think I may order one of this kit.
Okay, I'll send you the link.
It also sounds
I mean,
affordable. Yeah.
It could be good for another use case we've thought about is as a backup for a remote mining farm. I think with an internet connection, like a satellite bidirectional internet connection, plus this receive only, you could as a backup run a remote mining farm using it. So it could be interesting for that use case.
Sadly, it doesn't have polar region coverage.
That's right. Yeah, that's the only problem, because it's geostationary. You can't see it from the poles.
Nice.
Almost everywhere else.
Nice. And Chun is actually planning to build a mining farm in Antarctic. So this solution might be very helpful for his mining farm there. And talking of, in Malta, I think Chun was also mentioned it to me once, and he said he has a question about, for example, like why Adam moved to Malta, and after so many years living there, how do you feel about it? And do you have any advice for people who might consider to move to Malta?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of it's easy to move to if you have a European passport. Of course, I'm about to not have a European passport because of the Brexit, but there are still ways to get a residence permit with any passport, and it's kind of a low tax jurisdiction for offshore companies, internet gaming, films, tourism. So it's the most southern country in Europe. So it's quite warm.
Mm-hmm.
And almost everybody speaks English. Cost of living is pretty reasonable. It's very safe. So I like it a lot.
Where there's warm.
And yeah,
Sunshine.
you see a lot of European Bitcoiners arriving and moving here because it's there's no tax on crypto trading. So you could sell some Bitcoin and not be subject to tax.
Mm-hmm.
And so I meet new Bitcoiners. They say hello on the street, and then they join the local Bitcoin meetup. So there's a lot of new people turning up all the time because it's if you're a European, a lot of the Northern European countries have quite high income tax and capital gains tax and so on.
Nice. And I also know like you actually runs your mining and blockstream mining and operations in North America, and how's the business there, and what do you think of the China's changing role in the mining industry?
Yeah, we have two farms, one in Montreal, Canada, on hydropower, and another one near Atlanta, Georgia, in the US. That one's bigger. And I mean, I think it's good for decentralization that there's hash rate in many countries because it's not you just want like lots of countries so they can't agree and they leave Bitcoin alone. So if there are dozens of countries all doing 5 to 10% of mining spread across many different companies and individuals, that's great. No individual can change anything. Of course, Bitcoin will probably survive if one country did try to change something because Bitcoiners are activist investors and they adapt the technology. You saw that with the UASF that Bitcoin is very anti-fragile, and the anti-fragility is like users and investors and developers and miners and pools and so on. It's everybody, right? They like Bitcoin to be as it is. So if something threatens it, they fight back. So I think that's fine. And it's good that more people are getting involved in mining. It could be interesting. Eventually, maybe we'll see sovereign wealth funds doing mining, or even countries doing mining. Who knows? If you'd ask the question whether banks would be interested in Bitcoin, or hedge fund people like
Su.
the new people that get involved in Bitcoin, like Paul Tudor Jones, who apparently is quite a famous hedge fund guy, saying that he put 1 to 2% of his multi-billion-dollar fund into Bitcoin. So it sounded like there was over $100 million
and
OTC
he also said he got liquidated, and if people said no, then you were buying the wrong Bitcoin. No, that was a joke.
Okay, yeah. Anyway, so I think it's things move faster in Bitcoin than people expect. When we started Blockstream in 2014, we didn't expect that any banks would be interested in Bitcoin or blockchain, and within a year or two, every bank had a blockchain lab.
Nice.
We'll see what happens in the next few years, but it's probably going to be faster and more interesting than we expect.
Definitely. And like Kevin, he told me to tell you that if Blockstream one day plans to expand mining in China, he would love to be your reliable and trusted partner. But anyway,
okay.
Yeah. So
actually,
for me, if the Blockstream one day want to do satellite with some mining, I would like to be a partner.
Yeah, well, maybe you can try the advanced configuration to do mining in a remote location.
Yeah, I think satellite with the mining is kind of very interesting idea. Anywhere you can see the sky, you can mine, right?
And then you can mine.
Yeah. Well, we should talk offline. We have some ideas.
This is kind of vision, yeah. So Chun, how do you think we can make mining safer and more decentralized?
I also recently got a resident permit from Malta, and maybe someday I can visit Adam in person. And I also have planned to stay there for some extended time. So to make mining decentralized, yeah, definitely we must make mining decentralized. For now, like we have too much hash rate in China, a single country, and sadly, yeah. I think this recording probably most broadcast into China, so not a place to share my view. So yeah, we'll first decentralize our team, and second we'll decentralize our operation. But this is not the best place to explain in details.
Okay, got it. Thank you, Chun. Thanks. So I think Sue got a question also for Chun, something also related to this kind of like the geography issue. So maybe you, Sue, maybe you may ask.
Sure. I mean, obviously, we're in an environment of rising nationalism and U.S.-China conflict. I've seen a lot more people nowadays in the U.S. talk about how there needs to be Bitcoin mining that's happening in the U.S., happening on U.S. soil, and from a strategic marketing point of view or just a national security point of view. What are your thoughts on this kind of rising nationalism, and do you think it has merit, and how do you think it'll develop as geopolitical tension gets more and more tense?
Yeah. You mentioned that. Yeah, let me recall launch human by U.S. rocket from U.S. soil, things like this. Gonna happen within the next few days, right? So to me, statement like this quite narrow-minded, and also I feel nationalism, the Bitcoin Cash maximalist, they share a lot of similarities, Sorry about Bitcoin Cash followers. So yeah, before I got into crypto and Bitcoin, I spent quite a lot of time working on Wikipedia, contribute to Wikipedia. What I influenced the most from Wikipedia is neutral point of view, and that's basically share a lot of similarity to decentralization. So when you see anything or any problem in the world, try to see it from a neutral way, and try to see it from a God point of view. And this day, people are also talking about internet neutrality. So if you combine all these concepts, they all talking about the same thing, and potentially I feel blockchain and Bitcoin it must be have neutrality from a single entity, any single country, because if you look into the future, our current system and the history not that long, and people only gave up from using gold and silver, those fine metals, until 100 years ago, because the industrial revolution has changed a lot of things. It makes the global economy to grow sharply. That make gold and silver is no longer feasible to become a global currency. Before the invention of Bitcoin, there's no such thing to replace gold and silver, and Bitcoin makes this give the freedom, economic freedom, back to makes it possible again after gold and silver get retired. And countries like China, PRC, and the United States of America, the history is also quite short. So if you look into future, I bet after maybe 200 or 300 years, this world won't have a PRC and won't have a USA. So and we see people like we have white people, we have black people, we have Asian. That's because in the past, the technology, the transport technology, the communication technology is not that developed. And but things already changed. So it probably won't be a few hundred years, but I think at most a few thousand years, there won't be white people, black people, and Asian. There are only all the humans would be united in one. Probably we will see Earth people and Mars people, and basically that's it. So it makes no sense to like people to fighting with each other. And if you think this way, we do need a global currency. We do need a global. After to my understanding, Bitcoin is not it's just the beginning. First, we apply decentralization, this philosophy to economy, and then after it gets the seeds in economy, the next thing could be political. And you see, right now, every country will have a president, and what the president do is just declare a pandemic. What's the use of a president? Before, in the history, we need a president because the communication technology is quite backward. We need to delegate our everyday decision making to a president or king. And since, we have internet and we can make decision, the mass population could make every single tiny decision, and the cost is so low. And we don't need to delegate this decision making to someone else. So I think maybe we don't need a president anymore. And if we don't need that, maybe something decentralized governance should be replaced. Should be the future.
Okay. Thank you, Chun. And since we talk about nation, I think Su and I we had some discussion about the crypto in Latin America. So Su, you can share our discussion question to Beto, because Latin America definitely is very different, for example, from China, from the US, from Europe.
Yeah, I guess my question would be, just talking about stablecoins versus Bitcoin and how you see adoption going there in terms of, now that we're past the halving, the fees are, sometimes 100 sat per byte, sometimes higher, so you end up with $2, $3, $4. Do you see people tend to are the fees on the base layer an issue at this point for LATAM adoption? And do you see sort of basic stablecoins growing in traction? I mean, obviously we see a lot of stablecoin activity on Ethereum happening right now, on USDT, and how are you seeing that in LATAM?
Yes, it's a really good question. Well, there is a lot of usage right now. People are fleeing into crypto. In Argentina, mostly, we have last Friday, we entered into a credit default as a country. So even if they continue negotiating about the credit, and we might enter into embargoes from payments that come into Argentina through the US. The local central bank has an account in New York in the bank, and they can freeze that, the guys that want to get the money. So it happened before. We have a lot of practice with that. And people are saying, okay, what's safe? Because the local currency is not safe. And what's safe for us as an Argentinian? Well, the USD. But the USD is forbidden to be traded here. So Bitcoin is not. So in the last few weeks, we had 5x growth in the exchanges, getting into stable coins and Bitcoin. So it's really interesting because people are flying into crypto here. And this is what I've been seeing in the past few months. So I've been consulting some provinces, municipalities here, local governments, that want to use crypto, and they're pretty interested because it is a means for them to protect their money. And I'm telling you that that's government people. I have mayors, I have governors, which want to protect the money in crypto. So what we are doing now is trying to give them the solutions for that, because there's not so many tools for that. So that's why I started this new project, which is Bithan, to be able to give them infrastructure and tools for governments to be able to operate in the crypto infrastructure. And we're not there yet. You know, there's a lot to go, because we need, as you say, we have problems with the fees. So the only transactions that are really useful right now are the consolidated ones. So you need to have a good amount of money. So that's why we focus in government, business, and business to business. And what the governments want is to be able to also to have tokens to be able to trade. So you have everything inside the same crypto infrastructure, not trading with Bitcoin on a daily basis to go to buy a coffee, because that's as fees are not good for that. But maybe with the Lightning Network, but we're still not there yet on the technology side. So there is a lot to build, but there is interest. There is a lot of interest right now here, and I think that we'll be getting there. The same model, I think, that happened with communications, with Skype and versus local telecoms, is happening here. So, for example, I have one province that wants the bank to be able to give that infrastructure in crypto. So now we're talking government, banks wanting to use this infrastructure. And I think it's really, really exciting. And it has to do a lot with the COVID. It has to do with the acceleration of times because of these tragedies. And as you say before, nationalism, problems that are arising in the world, geopolitical problems, Bitcoin can solve all of them. Many things that it can solve. So it's really, really exciting. I am so excited about this. But I'm also aware that we have to work a lot. There's a lot to go yet. And we're just starting to see it.
Building infrastructure is never easy. And Beto, what are the main stable coins there? Like USDT or DAI or? Yeah,
people use a lot USDT, USDC, DAI, USDC less actually. But DAI, I think USDT are the main uses of stablecoins right now.
As many people in China are actually talking about USDT collapse or whatever, some conspiracy, I would also like to know, what do you think of USDT there?
Oh, I think that USDT has shown something about stablecoins, that it's not all about collateral. It's about usage. It's about what it solves for you to use this technology. So the price is not only in the collateral, it's also if it is useful for you. And I think that that is what you call at one point trust for the layman. The layman only wants to have some solution for the problem. So if USDT is a solution, they use it, but they don't hold into it. And that's what I always tell people. If you want to do an investment, go into Bitcoin on the long run, never on the short run. But if you want to use it to pay something or to do something that you're used to in USD denomination, yeah, you can use USDT, USDC, or any of the other, True USD. People are using a lot True USD as well. And you have all those solutions, and you can use them and hedge into crypto one way or another. You have all these possibilities.
I think Su knows, like being an active trader, definitely like USDT and BTC are probably the most, widely used coins, right? So Yeah, so thank you. I also, since you mentioned use case for the Bitcoin, and I know Adam and Beto, I know you both share the view that how important is the payment use case in the Bitcoin, since it's a purely peer-to-peer version of electronic cash that allows online payments to be sent directly from one party to another without going through any financial institution. Would you like to go a bit deeper into this topic and share insights with us, Beto and Adam?
Yeah, I mean the fees are an interesting problem, and it's of course people are starting to pay attention now, because the fees are up, and actually they're lower this weekend. I did one this morning for 2.2 sats per vbyte that got into the next block in a few minutes, but into last week you're probably into 50 to 100, if not more. Was get a dip at the weekend. But I think what people are thinking is that the fees are largely driven by traders, and it's because the traders are price insensitive because they're already paying a lot more. So they're paying $30 or $40 wire transfer fee. They're paying 20 basis points, like 0.2% or more commission for a taker on the exchange, and so if they have to pay 10 cents or $1 instead of 10 cents, they don't care. I mean, maybe they'll pay $2 just to be safe because they want their trade to happen quickly. They don't want the price to move. And unfortunately, the fee market is like there's a lot of trading bots, and they're not that clever. So they're like a room full of turkeys. If you've seen this phenomena, somebody says boo, and all the turkeys go blah blah blah, blah and make a lot of noise. So as soon as a trader comes in and he pays 10 satoshis, the next trader pays 20, 30, 40, 50, within a very short period of time, the fees are super high. And it's not really, strictly necessary. They're just software automatically paying more. But in any case, that creates a problem for people trying to do actual use. And it's ironic because the traders think that Bitcoin is great and the use cases are great for censorship-resistant money, permissionless money, and so forth. So they want to buy some of it, and they push the fees up and make it harder to use, which is where the value in the use case is. So I think the solution is not simple, but we have multiple layers. Most networks are organized with layers. Like TCP/IP is like that. Cell phone networks are like that, satellite communications are like that, even Bluetooth is like that. There are different layers of the communication stack. So with Bitcoin now, there are more layers than there used to be. A lot of people are familiar with Lightning, and that's, it's got a lot easier to use. There are a lot more wallets now. It's more reliable. It's a lot cheaper, and it's also just faster. So, even apart from the cost, Lightning transactions are final in a fraction of a second, and a Bitcoin transaction is not really, it could be undone, tens of minutes later. So for a really point of sale use case or immediate purchase online, Lightning is just better because everything that in layer 2 is making a trade-off. If it was possible to do something better, Bitcoin would already have done it, right? So you're usually giving something up for this advantage. So Lightning has a more reactive security model, hot wallet, so it's not as secure, but for smaller payments, it's definitely faster and cheaper and more scalable. And then, what Blockstream has been working on is a different layer 2 called Liquid, which is for traders, basically, people who are bidding the price up. It would be better for everybody if they would use a trading layer 2, and it has advantages for them. It's faster and it's confidential, so you don't get the kind of front-running risk of seeing a transaction on the whale alerts. And it supports multiple assets, so it supports Tether and Canadian dollars and Bitcoin and security tokens and what have you. So, and the fees are a lot cheaper. So even with the confidential transactions, the typical transaction on Liquid that will be final in 2 minutes is like 1 or 2 cents. And with the transaction fees during the week on Bitcoin, that's, it gets a lot more expensive. And so I think ultimately, the sort of positive competition between the different layers of Bitcoin, between the main chain, which is the best for cold storage and censorship resistant payments, and Lightning, which is the best for retail payments and micropayments, and Liquid, which is the best for traders and people doing exchange trading or moving money between, moving coins between exchanges or between exchanges and cold wallets. Then that's a better option for them. So if people use the best trade-off for that use case, it just makes the main chain more scalable and supports more use cases. So I think that's presumably the way things will evolve, and presumably, I would expect in the future we'll see more layer 2s optimized for different things as well.
Since you mentioned this trader,
may I add something? For me, like the current theory about the right number, maybe it could be a little bit higher, and because the fee is directly measure to the security of the network. Without the fee, if every new block is generated, the backlog cleared, then the network won't be safe, won't be secured. And given the block reward get halved and halved and halved, and the fees become more and more important.
Higher.
And given that before, like Bitcoin, it got stolen by 120,000 bitcoins, it's like someone paid a very high fee transaction. Like get stolen is basically very similar to like pay the fee to the network, and some miners, if either get contracted with Bitcoin to mine to roll back the network. To roll back the network, you're gonna have to take a risk. Like you have to compete with all other miners. Like it's like if a current block reward is 10 BTC, each new block you lose 10 BTC. Then if you have if you want to roll back 100,000 BTC worth of transaction, then the risk ratio is like 1 to 1,000. Even given you have 0.1% of hash rate, it's worth to make a bet. And so we must make sure this. What's the worst case? Someone got stolen. If, like, say, the worst case, someone could got stolen 100,000 BTC, then we must to ensure that the fee plus block reward won't be lower than some specific number, and the number higher than the those bad miners who willing to roll back the network to make the network safe. Maybe Adam could tell us. Right.
No, I mean it is a concern, particularly in the future where the reward is lower, and I think the most recent exchange hack where people even discussed, I mean nobody took it seriously, but there were people talking about it, right? Is Binance got hacked for $40 million of Bitcoin, and they were talking to people and asking if they could roll back, and of course it didn't happen. But that's not a good thing for Bitcoin. Bitcoin should be bearer and final. I think there might be ways to make it more final with additional. I mean, so if you think about it, one reason that became final is because they were too slow. By the time they were talking about it, an hour had passed. By the time more people were talking about it, a day had passed, and now they're not just undoing a mistake, but if you undid all of that, it would be a disaster. I mean, people would double spend it, exchanges would have an accounting mess, the whole of Bitcoin exchange, Bitcoin exchange world would be like Mt. Gox, years of accounting arguments, right? So I think it's extremely messy, so we don't want it to happen. I think there might be some like technical solutions. Like we could make miners that refuse to go backwards, let's say. So the individual miner normally is expecting the block height to increase, because even with the reorg, from its perspective, it only changes if it sees a longer block. It never changes to a shorter block height. So we could make miners with a firmware that says forwards only and refuses to go backwards. That would be another way to harden it, because now, what are you going to do? Somebody wants to roll back the block. Okay, what do they propose we do? Like take the top off the miner and change it? We haven't got time to do that, right? So it's not built like that now, but it could be, and maybe it should be.
So the only way to maintain the Bitcoin network safe and secure is maintain the relatively high fee rate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so you were talking about something a minute ago, which was the sort of less politics, more sort of open global consensus. So I thought there was an interesting quote from somebody called David Clark, which is in Internet Protocol history. So this is, I wasn't really paying attention, though I was using the internet back then, but there was a big protocol debate in the IETF in the early 90s, where the big companies that got involved, like Microsoft and Intel and different people who were making equipment, some of them thought that they should have the right to change the internet protocols because they were companies. And the people developing the protocols thought that the internet should be built for the users, like the Tron quote, "I fight for the users." So anyway, there's a big political debate, and somebody called Alex Bergeron wrote a blog post called "The Tao of Bitcoin Development," and he has the quote from this IETF argument by David Clark, who was at IETF, somehow involved with the IETF, and he says, "We reject kings, presidents, and voting. We believe in rough consensus and running code." So I thought it's great, because it's kind of, Bitcoin, the Bitcoin fork drama was kind of relearning the same story almost, right? Which is, Bitcoin should be for the users. And I like to think that Bitcoin would help, like Wang Chun was saying, about the, changing geopolitics and governments. So reducing the need for government. I've read the book called Snow Crash many years ago, and it's all about a future where the government kind of exists, but nobody cares or pays any attention to it because it's tiny and ignored. Mm-hmm. So I think that government's relevance and influence in the world shrinks over time, because people have more direct control of their affairs, and they can travel more easily, and they can communicate more easily. So I've got to think that the world is, the governments have less influence in some ways today than like 50 years ago, and maybe in another 50 years they'll be even less relevant. At least I hope so. So that's my hope for Bitcoin, to just make individuals more sovereign and make governments less relevant. Mm-hmm. So there's a really interesting statistic by one of the big international finance sort of intra-government things, that I think something like 50% of the world's working population is like self-employed gray market. Like they're working for cash in a country where there's no identity documents, or they're just working in the gray market. So if really that much of the world's working population is working for cash and mobile, they're a prime candidate for using Bitcoin, and for them, then the government is less relevant. Mm-hmm. So I like this trend. I want to see more of it.
What are your thoughts, Beto?
Yeah, I think like Adam in that sense, it's pretty interesting how Bitcoin has brought a new model for people that are already living on cash. Here in Argentina, we have that view. People are unbanked a lot, or underbanked, and we suffered lots and lots of economic experiments. So Bitcoin was a an interesting one to suffer as well. And I say suffer because you have to deal with it. You have to learn a lot on how to use it and what is best, and you adapt. So as long as there are more tools for using it, it will be easier for people. But at the, I don't know, 5 years ago, only techies could really use it. Today, it's easier. You have more tools. But then again, for example, with Lightning, you still have to be a techie. And that there are still many problems that have to be solved. So we'll see with time and how payments evolve in that sense, how can people actually use this networks, and how also the other tokens and the other blockchains are showing sometimes use cases that then you can get into Bitcoin later when Bitcoin is ready for that. I think that there are many things that Bitcoin needs to be slower because it needs to be safer. And other networks, other blockchains are able to go faster and show how to do some things, and then Bitcoin can get them. And I think that's why so many tokens are now in the air. It's not only because of trading, but also because there are different use cases. I think with all these CBDCs and governments trying to enter the token world, we have a very, very interesting middle ground where we can get people more into Bitcoin and into this, not needing so much the government. And I think that many governments actually want that, actually need to have less problems, because I believe in Bitcoin. It's very similar to cash, to the banknote. You know, you have the banknote in your hand and you're safe. You know you have the cash. And with Bitcoin it's the same. You have it. It is not in a bank account. It's not on someone else's custody. And I think that that's the main thing, that we need to go from cash into Bitcoin or into this token world where people can be their own bank, actually have everything that they need to transact. And the world is going that way. It will take some time for us to be able to build all the tools, but I think that in 50 years, this would be like, yeah, it's obvious. You know, why would you use a piece of paper if you have Bitcoin? And I think that we're going that way, but it will take some time.
Thank you, Beto. Since Adam was earlier mentioning like being a trader, transaction fee, I would like to know, Su, you are being an active, experienced trader. I mean, definitely transaction fee matters a lot. Do you have any comment on the previous the talk about the transaction fee, the high fee, and how that's going to impact maybe your trading?
I think it doesn't impact traders as much as users, as Adam was kind of alluding to, which is mainly the fact that the exchange fees on an exchange, you're still already going to pay, 3 or 4 basis points just to do a trade. So then, if you're trading decent size and you're moving capital around to rebalance your portfolio, you're happy paying whatever fee it takes to get into the next block quite often. So, I think we did some transactions that we paid just 200 sat per byte, where we just we need those coins to arrive very quickly, right? Especially when you're trying to move collateral around. So I think, in a way that's, it would be nice to see that go toward liquid. I mean, I think that the main problem has been that a lot of exchanges don't support it yet. So it's a process, right? It's a matter of I think one, I guess, is politics, but then 2 is just getting everyone on board with it. But my fear is that does crowd out real users. If someone just got to explain what Bitcoin is, and then they go and they try it, and they pay 20% of their balance out in transaction fees, it's not a great first experience. And I do fear that because these fees are not even in the beginning of phase, right? Like if we get into a real bull market, I can easily see like 1,000 cent per byte, like 3 days, these kinds of fees. So I do hope that we have solutions for down the line in the long run, and I think we will. But so I guess like for traders, you know, whatever the price is, it'll just be priced into the value of the trades, right? So people will take it into account. But it's where the trading can, in a way, crowd out the using of it on chain that kind of concerns me.
Thank you all. Thank you for your sharing. So now moving on to our final discussion tonight. So in China, our government has been promoting this new infrastructure idea where they officially include blockchain as one of the new infrastructures this year, together with 5G, IoT, AI, big data, and others. So how Bitcoin and blockchain will look like in the next 5 or 10 years from your perspective? Probably let's start with Chun.
Go for me.
Okay,
yeah.
Adam first.
How is blockchain going to look in the next 5 years?
Yes.
So
let's have some imagination. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of R&D going on. There's a lot of innovation. So I think there's, you know, we look backwards always and assume the future will look like the past, but the technology is evolving very quickly, and the adoption and use cases are moving faster than we expect. You know, each time in the past, if somebody would have asked you, you know, when the price was $100, is it possible to have 10,000? People would have said you're crazy, right? And here we are today. Or would you expect banks to, you know, be participating in conferences and running blockchain labs? And like, no, that would never happen, and so on. So all these things happen and happen faster. So I think we can expect more of the same. And on technology, on the technology front, there's a lot of R&D happening all the time. So I think, you know, for example, people are not so familiar with it, but there's a new smart contracting language which is designed for Bitcoin called Simplicity. And so this was first proposed in 2012 in IRC discussions. And so we hired the person who was proposing this, Russell O'Connor, and he's been working on it for about 4 years with, you know, most recently with Andrew Postra and Greg Maxwell a bit also. So it's a way to have security first, security guarantees, and formal proofs about security and behavior for Bitcoin and Liquid. So we released a branch of Bitcoin with Simplicity integrated, and a branch of Elements, which is the open source part, you know, platform that Liquid is built on. So we're hoping to have that available in Liquid late this year. And, you know, one of the advantages of sidechains is that people can try things in advance and see that they work and improve them. So, you know, in 2015, there was Schnorr signatures in Elements, the part of Liquid. And this year, you know, there's a BIP, and Schnorr signatures look to be coming to Bitcoin maybe this year, maybe next year, depending on how quickly that gets, you know, finished, review and activated. So you can see that, you know, things that can appear in a sidechain can maybe find their way into Bitcoin like 2 to 4 years later. So hopefully things like Simplicity and confidential transactions will also make their way into Bitcoin. And Simplicity changes things a lot because it's a general extension mechanism for Bitcoin. So for example, if Bitcoin had Simplicity today, then you wouldn't need a soft fork for Schnorr signatures or for the SIG hash no input, which is a feature for Taproot. Sorry, a feature for Lightning L2. All those things would be sort of self-extensible. You could implement them using Simplicity directly in the chain in a, you know, surprisingly compact and efficient way. So that self-extensibility is good because it lets you build more things and move faster, but still with security guarantees. And it means you have to change the chain less. So I think, you know, people like the idea of Bitcoin being sort of final and not undergoing rapid change. Sort of the phrase ossify in a positive way, right? That you want to be able to depend on the base layer and not see rapid changes in it. in the long term. So simplicity is a route to doing that, because I think actually there's a quote from Satoshi on a forum somewhere where he says something like he wanted to get scripting done so that there wouldn't need to be changes in Bitcoin. So that didn't actually work out because the scripting was a bit simplified and some of it ended up getting disabled because of security bugs. But I think the idea was great that if Bitcoin is made self-extensible, then we can add new features. So somebody who's working on Lightning could try different ways to do Lightning more efficiently. So yeah, I think a lot more innovation, probably some more layer 2s, more usability, more price. So I think the next 4 years will be very interesting with Plan B's stock to flow predictions. He's predicting, $100,000 or $300,000 Bitcoin. So we'll see if we see that. That would be very nice, obviously. But when you see people like Paul Tudor Jones turning up and buying $100 million or something like that OTC, people pay attention to that who are from the investment world, because it's somebody from their world who speaks their language and understands their interests. So, and also the economic condition right now is a kind of
concerning.
It's bad for the economy generally, but the amount of money printing that's going on and the fact that people have difficulty knowing what to invest in is a problem for them, right? They could invest in the stock market, but they don't know if it's bottomed. Normally they might invest in real estate, but maybe real estate in big cities is overpriced if people are going to work more remotely now. And interest rates are like 0 or negative. Governments are printing money like crazy. So nobody knows what to invest in. So it makes an interesting time for Bitcoin and gold. And that's basically what Paul Tudor Jones said and what other investors from the conventional investment world have said about Bitcoin. So there's a lot to look at in financial terms as well as technology terms in the next 5 years.
Thank you, Adam. So living in Argentina, I think Beto has probably more to imagine or to share with us. How do you think the Bitcoin in the next 5 years?
I think that what China is doing is pretty interesting on how they are ambitioning the connection with the other technologies and how blockchain start playing. Obviously, they are afraid. The government, as in many parts of the world, are afraid of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. So they want to separate something that you can't separate. So it's pretty interesting on how that will evolve. And for example, I used many use cases for international payments because it was really something that you could solve with Bitcoin. It is the main use case for problems that arise in payments. And I think that China right now is understanding that they can use this technology to push the international payments case, but they still don't know really how. They are still struggling on how to do it. And being able to connect to different blockchains, I think that's something that's a start point for them to be able to use it with countries like here in Latin America. And as I was telling you, we have problems with credit default, so we won't be able to have money from other places. And this makes a new infrastructure for countries to invest in other countries and be able to get the money back and not being embargoed by some middle country. So I see it that way. I see it that the infrastructure of Bitcoin and blockchain will start gaining weight on many countries. And here in Argentina, I really hope, and I'm working on that, to be able to have solutions for the people to be able to live better, to have better tools at their disposal to protect their money, and also to be able to trade with other countries. So it's really interesting, but it takes time to see it go through, and also to make the people with decision on the governments to understand how this will help them also to provide a better living for the citizens. So, well, I think that's it.
Thank you, Beto. And how about you, Chun?
Yeah. So I think Adam already explained quite in details. I still remember that when I first started mining Bitcoin, I expected like Bitcoin may survive for 2 months at least. So because from my calculation, then the difficulty and my hash rate, I can recover my investment within 2 months. And sadly, I didn't expect the difficulty went up so rapidly, so I didn't recover my investment after 2 years. I only recovered my investment after 2 years. So, it's so hard to make a prediction. But what I know right now is Bitcoin will survive after 5 or 10 years. Definitely will survive. It's something. For us, like for me, it's I also invest a lot in altcoin, but after checking all these altcoins, including Ethereum, Bitcoin Cash, all this, I would say Bitcoin is the most promised because why? Is the reason is Satoshi. Satoshi is you check all other coins, Cosmos, Ethereum, no one comparable to Satoshi. So Bitcoin is only fully decentralized and global currency belong to the humanity.
Thank you, Chun. And you, Su?
I think this whole decade will be very important for Bitcoin on the main stage, as it becomes a sort of macro convergence where macro investors consider it alongside gold, where individuals consider it as a saving technology. I think for the other blockchains, I do think that there will be a separation where it'll become increasingly clear that money tends to want to go toward one. It's a sort of a social coordination game. So you don't generally have a lot of. I don't imagine that there will be a lot of different altcoins or coins competing for monetary premium in general. But I do think that there are use cases on some other blockchains. I think Ethereum has some use cases that are already quite powerful. I think some of the interop stuff like Cosmos and Polkadot, I think, are also interesting in terms of as decentralized experiments as well as governance experiments. I think it's very hard to predict, right? Because when the Ethereum ICO came out, not a lot of people bought it and made that 1,000, 3,000x. So, but nowadays, like, everyone has a lot of opinions on it. So it's the kind of thing where, ultimately, people always underestimate the virality involved in crypto. Where if there are some interesting use cases that solve people's problems that are really powerful, I think the adoption waves can be much bigger this time because there's no more regulatory hurdles like there were before. There's no more sort of stigma, right? There's no more social stigma around it. People will just consider it alongside something else. If we have, decentralized applications that are better than our existing centralized walled garden applications, I do think people will want to use them and try them out, especially the younger generation. And I think that ultimately, I would say Bitcoin definitely for monetary maximalism, and I think the other blockchains, it's still too early to tell, but there's a lot of exciting stuff that people are trying to do, and I do hope they get there. So.
And thank you, Sue. Sue, I love your recent tweet about people will buying the Bitcoin dip at 20,300 within a year. Hopefully, this will be one of the good news for this special year 2020. Yeah. And I really thank you guys for being here tonight, and thank you very much for all your great work to push this Bitcoin moving forward. And I hope the show as a bit of fun to your lockdown life, and remember to sing Happy Bitcoin while washing your hands for 20 seconds. Originally it was to sing Happy Birthday, and I recently discovered actually sing Happy Bitcoin sounds also nice. Happy Bitcoin to you. It sounds actually quite nice. So thank you again. So good night from Beijing, guys. Thanks.